Arizona Territory. Spring of 1883, the sky was wide and sharp with heat, and every breath of wind carried dust and judgment. Lettie Whitlow stepped off the rickety stagecoach into the dry hush of Copper Bend with her chin raised, her wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face that had seen 42 hard, lonesome years. The driver barely looked at her as he tossed her trunk onto the ground. Folks on the boardwalk glanced once, then looked away. She heard the whisper before she even reached the boarding house. Too old for marriage. The words stung, but she did not flinch. She had not come here to marry. She had come because, after burying her father in Kansas and finding herself the last Whitlow alive, there was no reason to stay where she was not wanted. She had answered an ad for a schoolteacher, a one-room schoolhouse in need of someone steady, and Lettie had always been steady. The boarding house was plain but clean. Mrs. Tompkins, round and red-faced, showed her to a small room upstairs. "You'll find the town quiet," the woman said. "And the men, well, they all want girls half your age, but you seem sensible enough not to care." Lettie just nodded. She had not come for any man, and certainly not one looking for a girl with peaches still in her cheeks. 2 days later, she met him. He was standing just outside the schoolhouse fence, his hands resting on the shoulders of a boy and a girl. The children looked like they had not smiled in weeks. Lettie was sweeping dust from the schoolhouse steps, the sun baking her back. "Miss Whitlow?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She turned. He was tall, with silver streaks in his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes. Not handsome in the young way, but something else, something solid. "I am," she said, gripping the broom tighter. "I am Declan Tarrow. These are my children. Beatrice is 6, Benjamin is 8. Their mother died last spring." His jaw worked, clenched and released. "They have not been to school since." Lettie glanced at the children. Beatrice clung to her father's leg, her dress too short for her skinny legs. Benjamin stared at the ground. "They are welcome here," Lettie said. Declan gave a short nod. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." He turned to go, but Benjamin suddenly asked, "Will you make us learn penmanship?" Lettie smiled. "Only if you hate it." The boy gave the smallest grin, and Declan looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. The children came every day after that. Lettie taught them letters and numbers, but also how to plant seeds in the small garden behind the schoolhouse, how to read aloud without fear, how to laugh again. Slowly they softened. So did Declan. He came by once a week to bring her eggs or firewood or news from town. He always stood a little too close, just enough to make Lettie's pulse skip. She told herself it was nothing, a widower being kind, a schoolteacher doing her duty. But one afternoon, as she walked the children home after class, a group of women outside the mercantile whispered again. "Too old." No children of her own. What could he possibly see in her? Lettie kept her eyes forward, but she felt the words burn. Declan heard them too. That night he showed up at her door. "I do not care what they say," he said. His voice was firm, but his eyes were soft. "You are the first person who has looked at my children and seen them, not their grief. And you are the first person who has looked at me without pity." Lettie stepped aside to let him in. He did not come inside. He just stood there under the porch light, his hat in his hands. "I know I am not young, I know what people think, but I see you, Lettie, and I want to know if you see me too." Her breath caught. "I see you, Declan," he smiled, and it was quiet and full of something that felt like hope. The next morning, Benjamin ran to the schoolhouse ahead of his sister, his face flushed. "Papa says we are going to have supper with you on Sunday." Lettie blinked. "He did?" "Yes. He said you like roasted chicken. He is going to try and not ruin it." She laughed, then touched the boy's shoulder. "I would like that very much." That Sunday she stood in Declan's small home, her hands shaking as she helped Beatrice set the table. The walls were plain but clean. There were drawings on the mantel, crayon scrawls of trees and horses. A woman's scarf still hung near the door. Declan handed her a plate of chicken, his fingers brushing hers. "I have not done this in a long time," he said. "Me neither," she whispered. They sat across from each other, the children between them. Laughter came easier than she expected. The food was not perfect, but Lettie barely noticed. After supper, they sat on the porch while the children played with sticks in the dirt. Declan looked out toward the hills. "I did not think I would feel anything again," he said. "Not like this, not with someone like you." She turned to him. "Someone like me," he met her eyes. "Strong, kind, steady, too good for what this town says." Lettie swallowed hard. "They say I am too old for marriage." He turned toward her. "Then they are fools." There was a long pause, just the cicadas humming and Benjamin laughing in the distance. "I do not care how old you are," Declan said. "I just care that I feel peace when I am near you." She reached across the space between them, and her fingers found his. He wrapped his hand around hers, warm and sure. In that moment, Lettie knew she had not come to Copper Bend to find love. But somehow, it had found her anyway. 3 weeks passed, and Lettie found herself learning the rhythm of Copper Bend in ways she hadn't expected. Mornings began before the sun cracked the ridge, her hands aching from sleep, her thoughts already on the day's lessons. Each child in her classroom brought something different: quiet mischief, shyness, bursts of wild questions, but it was Beatrice who clung hardest. Her small fingers often curled around Lettie's wrist as they sounded out words, as if afraid the woman might vanish if she let go. On Thursdays, Lettie walked to the Tarrow homestead after class, the children racing ahead while she carried whatever she'd baked that week: cornbread once, then a jar of apple preserves, and lately, a tin of ginger biscuits. Declan never asked for anything, but he always looked at the parcel in her hands with quiet gratitude, and she noticed how he took care to warm the kettle before she even stepped through the door. This Thursday, he was mending a fence rail near the barn as she arrived. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and there was a smear of dust across his cheek. The children dropped their satchels in the yard and darted off toward the creek. Lettie hesitated at the edge of the fence line, the tin in her hands still warm. "I brought biscuits this time," she said. Declan leaned on the hammer for a moment, looking up at her with a tired smile. "Then I reckon I'm the luckiest man west of the San Pedro." She passed the tin over the fence and watched as he opened it, sniffed, and took one without hesitating. He chewed slowly, then nodded once. "You put cloves in these?" "I did. Makes them taste like Christmas." He looked down at the biscuit in his hand, then back up. "Haven't had anything remind me of that in a long while." Lettie rested her arms on the top rail. "When was the last time?" He took a breath. "The year before she passed. The last winter we had snow thick enough to keep the cattle penned in for 2 days. She made a pie with the last of the canned peaches. We ate it with spoons straight from the dish." There was no sadness in his voice, only distance, a memory worn smooth with time. "I never had much use for holidays," Lettie said, "but I remember one Christmas when I was 10. My father gave me a ribbon the color of cornflowers, said it came from St. Louis. I wore it until it frayed to threads." Declan chuckled. "I can picture that." She straightened, brushing dust from her skirts. "You're good with your hands. That fence rail's near perfect." "I used to be better," he said, "but I get by." He looked at her, then added, "You ever fix things?" "Books mostly, and once a clock that wouldn't chime. Took me near a full day, but I got it working again." Declan came around the fence and stood beside her, his boots scuffing the dry ground. "I've got a clock like that. Doesn't keep time worth a damn." She tilted her head. "Bring it by the schoolhouse tomorrow." "I'll see what I can do." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her face, the lines near her mouth, the way her hair had come loose at the nape of her neck. Then, carefully, he said, "You always speak like you expect to be useful." "Not many people do that anymore." "I was raised to earn my place," she replied, "even if it's just by fixing something small." Declan nodded, his eyes still on her. "You've earned far more than that." The children called from the creek, and the spell broke. Lettie stepped back, brushing her hands down her apron. "I should head home before the sun dips. The path gets rocky after dusk." "I'll walk you," Declan said. "You've got work still. It can wait." They walked side by side along the narrow trail that led back toward town. The mesquite trees cast long shadows, and the air held the first promise of evening chill. Declan didn't speak, and Lettie didn't press him, but just before they reached the split in the path, the place where he would turn back, he paused. My sister lives up near Prescott, he said. She wrote me last week, wants to take the children for a few days this summer, says they should know their cousins. Lettie looked at him. Will you go with them? He shook his head. No, I thought I'd stay, let them have their time and I'd have mine. She waited, sensing more. I thought maybe I'd paint the porch, put in a new sill for the back door, maybe take a ride up into the hills. His voice was measured. If you're not too busy then, maybe you'd come with me. Lettie adjusted her hat, the brim low against the setting sun. You asking me to go riding, Declan Tarrow? I am. She let the silence settle before answering. Then I suppose I'll need to see if my boots are still good for saddle work. He smiled, not wide, but enough to crease the corner of his eyes, and tipped his hat before heading back down the trail. Lettie watched him until he passed out of sight, then turned toward town, her heart lifting like a bird startled into flight. The hills west of Copper Bend rose in low, weathered folds, their shoulders dusted with sage and sun-bleached rock. Lettie's skirts gathered dust as her mare picked its way up the narrow trail. Declan rode ahead, his hat pulled low, reins held loose in one gloved hand. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the edge of town, but the quiet between them wasn't hollow. It held shape, like something built rather than left behind. At a bend where the trail widened, Declan slowed. There's a spot just ahead. Ridge looks out over the valley, gets the last of the light. Lettie nodded once. Her knees ached from the ride, but she didn't say so. They reached the ridge as the sun dipped low, casting long blue shadows across the basin. A weathered stump served as a seat, and Declan dismounted, offering his hand without ceremony. Lettie accepted it, letting him steady her as she stepped down. He opened his saddlebags and pulled out a folded cloth, then spread it on the earth. From within, he drew 2 tin cups, a corked bottle, and a parcel wrapped in wax paper. I boiled coffee this morning, he said. It's gone cool, but it's strong. She sat beside him, smoothing her skirts. That sounds like a fair trade for biscuits. He poured carefully, then handed her a cup. The scent of chicory and burnt grounds drifted up as she took a sip. It was bitter and honest. Declan unwrapped the parcel. Inside were 2 thick slices of bread, slabs of cold ham, and a wedge of hard cheese. He passed her one of the sandwiches, then tore into his own without comment. For a while they ate in silence, the wind tugging at the edge of the cloth. Lettie watched a hawk circling far above the ridge. You ever think about leaving this place? Declan chewed, swallowed, then wiped his fingers on his trousers. I used to. Right after she passed, thought maybe I'd take the children north. Start again someplace where folks didn't know our name. But you stayed. I did. His gaze drifted to the valley. Ben took sick that winter, bad, couldn't risk the travel. By the time he was well enough, I reckoned we'd already started laying down roots again. Not the same kind as before, but new ones, thinner, still holding. Lettie rested her cup in her lap. I never had roots, not real ones. My father moved us every few years. Dry land, drier towns. He never stayed where he couldn't be left alone. Declan looked at her then, his brow furrowing. Was he hard on you? No, she said softly, just empty. Like he'd forgotten how to speak anything but silence. When he passed, it was quiet in the room, felt like nothing had changed. He didn't offer sympathy. She liked him for that. Instead, he asked, and now she met his eyes. Now I hear children laughing in my classroom. I walk home with dirt on my hem and someone waiting to ask how my day went. She paused. That's more than I thought I'd ever have. Declan shifted, one hand resting near hers on the cloth. When I first saw you, I figured you were here to pass through. That maybe Copper Bend be too small for someone like you. I thought the same of you, she said. Didn't think you'd stay open long enough for anyone to get close. I didn't plan to, he admitted, but you kept showing up, with your quiet voice and your steady hands. You made it hard to keep the door shut. She turned toward him, the wind lifting strands of gray from her braid. I didn't come here for this. I didn't think it was still possible, he nodded once. Same. The last of the light gilded the ridge, and the sky deepened from copper to indigo. Lettie reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over his hand. He stilled, then turned his palm to meet hers. The warmth of it made something settle in her chest, something long restless. "I want to build something," he said, voice low. "Not just for the children, for myself. For you, if you'll let me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted his cup and refilled it, then her own. She passed it back, their fingers brushing again. After a long sip, she said, "If we're building, let's do it with both feet planted. No hiding. No turning away when it gets hard. You have my word," he said. "And you'll need to teach me how to mend a fence rail," she added. "If I'm to stay, I ought to be useful." He gave a soft chuckle, the sound pulling at something warm between them. "Then I'll teach you, and you'll teach me how to fix that clock, and maybe we'll learn the rest as we go." The wind shifted. Below them, the valley lay quiet, the lights of Copper Bend flickering like shy stars. Lettie leaned her shoulder to his, and he let it rest there. They watched the world slip into night, together on the ridge, hands clasped. No promises made that couldn't be kept. No words wasted. Just the slow, certain beginning of something true. The classroom door creaked softly as Lettie unlatched it and stepped inside. It was early still, the sun not yet high enough to cast more than a golden slant through the east window. She moved quietly, setting her satchel on the desk and removing a folded cloth bundle. Inside it, carefully wrapped, lay the clock Declan had brought her the day before, a small mantelpiece piece with a carved walnut frame and hands that hung limp on their face. She placed it gently on the table and lifted the back panel with the tip of a letter opener. The mechanism inside had grit in its gears and a spring that had slipped partway from its housing. It would take patience to coax it back to life. As she worked, the door opened gently behind her. "I didn't think you'd be here yet," Declan said, stepping inside with Ben and Beatrice trailing him. Both children carried baskets of early apples, the green ones speckled with dust. "I like the quiet before the day begins," she said, not looking up from the clock. "It's honest." Ben wandered to the corner where the slate boards leaned against the wall, while Beatrice took a seat near the window and watched Lettie's hands with silent focus. Declan set the baskets beside her desk. "We found them near the edge of the creek. Thought you might make something sweet with them." "I might," she said, tightening a gear with the tip of her nail file, "though they're a bit tart for pie." "Then I'll eat them raw," he said, pulling a chair nearer. "You always fix things with your hands like that. Comes from not having enough to replace what broke," she said simply. "If I couldn't mend it, I went without." He watched her for a long moment. "You ever want something you couldn't mend?" She set the file down, finally glancing his way. "Yes." He didn't ask what. Instead, he reached into his coat and drew out a folded envelope. "I got a letter today from the county office in Tucson. They've approved the land petition. I can fence the north pasture now, legally." Lettie blinked. "That's been waiting for how long?" 7 months, he said. "Didn't think it'd come through." "What will you do with it? Expand the herd, maybe, not right away." "But I've been thinking," he paused, eyes steady. "If you ever wanted more than the schoolhouse, that land could hold a home." She met him there in the quiet invitation of it. "You asking me to leave the boarding house? I'm asking if you'd build something with me, not just fences and walls." "A life." Beatrice looked up from her perch beside the window. "Will you still teach us if you live at the ranch?" Lettie knelt beside her. "Of course I will. I'll still ring the bell each morning. I'll still keep the chalk and the books." "That won't change." The girl nodded solemnly and returned to her sketching. Declan stood and crossed to the chalkboard. "I can have the back room cleared by the weekend. There's space enough for your things." "I'd want to bring my sewing table," Lettie said lightly. "And the dictionary?" He smiled, faint and sure. "Then bring them." She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'll need to speak with Mrs. Tompkins, settle up my rent. I'll come with you if you'd like." She considered, then nodded. "Yes. I would like that." As the children began their lessons, Declan stayed seated near the stove, mending a broken buckle on Ben's satchel. Lettie watched him from the front of the room, chalk in hand, the children tracing letters behind her. There was no rush to anything. No declarations. Only the slow, aching ease of something real, hands finding rhythm. Lives pressing gently together. When the bell rang at noon, Ben and Beatrice helped carry the apple baskets to the boarding house, while Declan walked beside Lettie, their steps matching without thought. "I was thinking," he said as they turned up the lane, "we could clear that patch near the cottonwood for a garden. Might grow enough squash and onions for winter." "If the soil's good," she replied, "we could try carrots too, and I'd like a clothesline." "Not too close to the smokehouse," he nodded. "We'll put it along the south wall, catch the wind." At the door to the boarding house, Mrs. Tompkins stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. Her brows rose slightly at the sight of them. "I'll be leaving," Lettie said calmly. "End of the week." The woman looked between them, then simply nodded. "I'll have your last bill ready tomorrow." As they turned away, Declan offered his arm. Lettie took it, her fingers resting just above his wrist. They walked back toward the schoolhouse in silence, the afternoon lights softening the hard lines of the street. Behind them, the wind rustled the cottonwood leaves, and ahead, the future waited not loud or bright but steady. Certain. The sun burned low and steady behind the cottonwood as Lettie folded her dresses into a cedar-lined trunk. The boarding house room was stripped to its bones, her life packed in neat piles. Sewing notions wrapped in muslin, books tied with twine, the ribbon once given her as a girl tucked into a copy of Plutarch's Lives. Declan waited outside with the wagon, the children perched on the bench beside him, Beatrice's feet swinging in her Sunday shoes. Mrs. Tompkins had said little after handing over the final receipt, just nodded once and turned back to her parlor. Lettie hadn't expected more. She closed the trunk, wiped her palms on her skirt, and took one last look at the room. It had been enough when she needed it a place to sleep to begin again. But it was not a home. When she stepped out into the light, Declan stood and moved to meet her. He lifted the trunk as if it weighed less than it did and set it in the back of the wagon without a word. Beatrice leaned over the side, watching her closely. Lettie climbed up without help. The seat was worn smooth, the wood warm beneath her. Declan handed her the reins. "You drive," he said. "It's your road now, too." She glanced at him, sunlight catching the silver at his temples. "Then let's go." They rode slow, the wagon creaking under the weight of her things and the children's quiet chatter. The air held the smell of turned earth and mesquite smoke. No voices followed them. No eyes watched from windows. Let them talk if they would. A life wasn't built with approval. It was built with hands and time. At the ranch, the front gate stood open. The garden plot had been cleared of stones and a line of twine marked where Rose would go. A new clothesline stretched taut beside the shed. Lettie noticed a second rocking chair on the porch, its paint still fresh. Inside, the back room had been swept and aired. A quilt hung over the foot of the bed, one she hadn't seen before, deep blue with gold stitching. Declan stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I found it in a trunk in the loft," he said. "She made it the year Beatrice was born. I thought it might belong here again." Lettie touched the edge of it. "It's beautiful." "I didn't want to fold it away anymore. Thought if it stayed out, she'd still be part of the living." She turned to face him. "That's a kind way to remember her. She was kind and strong, different from you, but not lesser." "You don't have to explain," Lettie said. "I'm not here in her place." "I'm here in mine." He came to her then, slow, careful, and took both her hands. "I never thought I'd find peace again, not after her, but you brought light through the cracks. I didn't do anything more than show up. That was everything." His voice was rough in his throat. "You stayed." She stepped into the circle of his arms, and he held her close, not with desperation, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited long enough to know what real steadiness felt like. The days that followed came with new rhythm. Lettie rose early, her hands dusted with flour by dawn. She taught in the mornings, walked home in the afternoons. She and Declan cooked shoulder to shoulder, her pie crusts next to his roast potatoes. They planted onions and squash. The fence got patched, the roof mended, the clock worked again. One evening, Beatrice crept into the kitchen holding a folded paper. "I drew our house," she said, "with Miss Lettie in it." "Let me see," Lettie said, kneeling. The drawing showed 4 figures beneath a crooked roof. One tall with a wide hat, one with a long braid, and two children holding hands. Above them, a sun with long yellow rays. Declan looked over her shoulder. "You forgot the chickens." Beatrice frowned. "I did." Lettie touched the corner of the page. "But you remembered us." "That's what matters." Later that night, as the children slept in their room and the porch creaked under a soft breeze, Lettie leaned her head against Declan's shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," he chuckled. "I'd like to build a second shelf in the schoolhouse." "You're running out of space for those books." "That would help," she said. "But I think we'll need more desks next year. Word's gotten out." "Let them come," he said. "It's a good thing what you're doing." She tilted her face toward him. "What we're doing." He kissed her then, soft and sure, not like a man recovering from loss, but like one who had made it through and found something worth holding on to. She kissed him back, her hand resting over his heart. It beat steady beneath her palm. They sat long after the stars brightened, the lamplight behind them casting gold across the porch boards. Time passed. The schoolhouse grew fuller. Children came from as far as the San Pedro, some walking 2 hours each way. Lettie taught them all firm and fair. Declan added a stall to the barn, then another. The garden yielded enough to trade at the general store. One summer they added a room to the house. Lettie filled it with a writing desk, a window seat, and shelves that Declan built by hand. Beatrice read her first full book there, curled beside the window. Benjamin built a small cart for hauling water. They grew older. The gray spread through his hair and her hands grew stiffer in the cold. But they never lost the habit of small touches his hand on her back, her fingers curled around his forearm. They lived with simple devotion, the kind that didn't need grand words. One evening, years on, Lettie stood by the garden gate as the sun set. Declan joined her, wiping dust from his palms. "Came out nice this year," he said. It did. They watched the rose sway in the breeze, onions sending up green shoots, squash blossoms just beginning. "I still remember the first time you brought biscuits," he said. "I remember you pretending they weren't too strong. They tasted like home." She reached for his hand and he took it in his. They stood like that until the stars blinked out one by one, the dusk folding into night. They had built a life. Brick by brick, word by word, love not loud but lasting. And it held.